Well, here we are once again, folks. It's the Andy Alberti show, and we're back on the air. So, today I want to do something really special for a certain group of people, the ultra smart, super intelligent people that live in this world. And I have to tell you, you're probably wondering, well, who could that be? Well, here's how you tell the super smart people. If you're having a discussion with several people, and one of those people constantly interrupts and overtalks the other people when they're having something to say. Obviously, they must be the super smart people because they can't bear to hear what anybody else's opinion or thought is. Typically, in my experience in life, that has always been somebody who is a liberal, progressive Democrat. The Republicans and conservatives, not all conservatives are Republican, by the way. Some of them are different. But typically, it's the Democrat. And you can see it on television. You can see it when you watch Fox News. You can see it when you watch any of the news and talk shows. It's always the Democrat who just can't stand to hear somebody else's opinion other than their own. So they must be, by assumption, the smart ones. So today's show, I'm dedicating it to all the smart Democrats that are here in Nye County and anybody else that wants to listen. And as most of you know, this show comes to you direct from 98.1 FM in Pahrump, Nevada. Now, we will be listing the shows up on Facebook and YouTube. So if you've missed something and you want to go back and watch it, it'll be there. All right, so since I'm addressing the smart people, there was an opinion from a man named Brad Swanson, and he wondered why smart people believe dumb lies. And it's kind of a full column in the newspaper. I have it here in front of me. And he goes into his article here and he says, I won the in-law lottery. My mother-in-law is a gracious and sophisticated woman, well-traveled, well-educated, the author of several books on local history. She is the kind of person who wouldn't give the alternate reality of Trump world a second look. Well, this guy is saying what I just told you. Except she did. In fact, now this is a rarity. In fact, she fell for it hook, line, and sinker. She voted for Donald Trump twice and still believes today that his re-election victory was stolen by a vast and hidden deep state conspiracy. So his opinion here is that he's smarter than she is. But who knows really who's the smartest one? That's a question we all have to ask ourselves. What is it that makes us smart? So the biggest factor studies show is sustained immersion in the sea of fake news and exclusion from other viewpoints, whether voluntarily choosing to live in an echo chamber or involuntary due to government control of the media, as in Nazi Germany and Rwanda. Why he picked Rwanda is beyond me, but there you go. He could have picked a lot of countries. And I have to tell you something. I don't consider myself to be one of the smart ones, but I just happen to have a radio show and I can talk about the smart ones. So what is the truth that makes you free if you can't hear it? And there's a contributing factor in what psychologists call confirmation bias. We tend to focus on news that confirms what we already believe. So if the smart people believe that the election wasn't stolen, then they don't believe it. And if the stupid people believe that it was, there's the difference. But what is the truth? Now, I have to tell you, when I'm sitting in my home, and I do a mailing out based on the voter list in Nye County. And I send out a 3,000-piece mailing, all first class, so I can be sure this is based on the voter list. I took the addresses right off the voter list. And if I send it out first class, I'm assured that a semi-government agency is going to send me back everybody who doesn't live at the address I mailed to. Now, I didn't know who was who or what was what. I just took the addresses and mailed it out. So I started getting some envelopes back. One day I got 10, 15. The next day I got 350. And eventually, when the last mailing came back to me, out of that 3,000-piece mailer, I got back 750 people that the post office says don't exist in Nye County at the address they're listed at. Now, you would think that because the Postal Service should be trusted, they have nothing to gain by returning those envelopes. You would think that if the post office were to notify me that they're not here, that the registrar of voters, or in the case of Nye County, the clerk, would be able to remove those people from the voter list, not permanently, but set aside so that if they do vote, you could catch them in the act. Now, I can't show you who voted and who didn't because I don't have access to that. But I can tell you that if there's 750 out of 3,000 voters, and there are 31,000 voters registered in Nye County, that translates, or if you extrapolate, that's the word that most smart people would know. If you extrapolate the 750 out of 3,000, you would come up with 7,500 roughly voters who don't belong on the voter rolls. Now, I can't believe that some of them might not have voted in an unscrupulous manner. But the smart people would say that's not possible. And the dumb people, me included, would say, wait a minute, that has to have happened. Why don't we clean up the voter list? And we could actually clean it up by just taking all those names that the post office sent back to us as not existing. I mean, some people wrote back and said they passed away 6 months ago, or they moved, my neighbor moved 5 months ago. And I started looking at this because I went through the voter list some time back, a couple of years ago, and I found 3 different families living in the same single family residence at different times, but all still listed on the voter list. So not being as smart as the Democrat would be, to me, I made a mistake. I shouldn't even talk about this, but I'm going to. Let's clean up the voter list. And I'm going to suggest this as just one of the dumb people who don't understand how things work. I'm just going to suggest this to the county clerk, who's another one of the dumb ones because she was a Republican also. No disparagement on her because she's in the same class I'm in. I'm going to suggest that what she should do is to take those names and set them in a separate category, as in potentially non-existent in Nye County at this address. I mean, after all, if the post office says they're not there, then they're not there. But state law requires her to follow a process. Now, the smart ones, the Democrats, would say, we don't care what the law says. We're going to take them out anyway. And then we'll wait till the courts decide whether this is legitimate or not. I mean, Washington's doing that already. Joe Biden has already made the statement that he's taking an action and he's going to wait and see. He knows it's not legal. I mean, it's a violation of the Constitution. And his very words were, well, we'll do it, and then we'll let the courts decide. And we know we're probably going to lose, but we're going to do it anyway. That's my kind of guy. I like a guy who operates like that. And actually, the smart people will tell you right now that all the problems we're seeing in the world and in shipping and empty shelves on the store and deliveries not being made and all kinds of things, that's not the Democrats' fault, even though it all started to happen when they took office. And the dumb ones like me think, oh, well, it must be the Republicans because they're not in power anymore. So I just wanted to make sure that we recognize fake news when it's fake and real news when it's news. And my job, as I see it, as a broadcaster over the airwaves, is to bring you the truth. The question is, how do we get to the truth? Now, we do have a phone number for the station. It's 990-4900. And that's, again, it's actually 775-990-4900. And if you're one of the smart people, I'd love to have you call in and educate me and the rest of us on just what it is we don't understand about what goes on these days. I have my own thoughts. And I share those thoughts. You know, I do a breakfast every Thursday morning with a group of people. By the way, I wanted to mention something about that. There's a thing going on throughout the United States called ROMEO clubs. ROMEO, ROMEO. And ROMEO stands for Retired Old Men Eating Out. And basically what they do is they get together once a week, they have breakfast, and they have a long conversation. Well, I've been doing that with the group since 2007, on and off, and we still meet every Thursday morning, 7:30, currently in the museum. And if you haven't been to the museum, it's an interesting place. Got some really neat stuff. Matter of fact, they got some brand new lighting. When you walk in there, you're going to need sunglasses. It's so bright, but it's a pleasure. And it's actually a cost-saving measure. Okay, well, that's a topic for another day. But anyway, we had this discussion this morning about, it really wasn't about smart and stupid people, because in our opinion at breakfast, everybody is smart. We just have different opinions. And we can all take a chance at expressing our opinions without fear of retaliation. Well, there might be retaliation, but when we leave, we all leave as friends. So that's how it goes. And so these ROMEO clubs, ours is called the men's breakfast, not because we're so proud of being men. It's just that that's the way it started. So this morning we got on the subject of politicians. And actually I had sent this out in my email announcing, every week I send out an email announcing what we're going to talk about at breakfast, or at least what I plan to talk about. Doesn't mean we're going to talk about that, but that's kind of how it is. And so the question I asked in the email was, how do you ask a government employee or elected official a question so you get a straight answer? How can you answer a question without answering it? And why is it that once a government puts a program in place, it becomes perpetual? And I brought up, to start the conversation, articles that you'll read in the newspaper. And it's always interesting to look at those because they don't always tell you the names of the people involved in doing things. And I brought an article This is by a man named Charles Blow, B-L-O-W, Blow, I don't, whatever it is, that's how it's spelled. And he writes, in 1970, the percentage of Americans between the ages of 25 and 50 who had never married was just 9%. By the time I became an adult, that number was approaching 20%. And then he says, some people were delaying marriage, but others were foregoing it altogether. And all during the article, he goes in to argue the happiest subgroup is women. He didn't mention any names. There's nothing you can do to get a handle on who the hell was he talking to? Where did he get his information from? He says, as a society, we have to start asking ourselves whether it is fair and right to continue and reward and encourage marriage through taxation and policy when fewer people, disproportionately black ones, how does he know that? I don't know. There must have been a study. Who did the study? He doesn't tell us. Or choosing marriage or finding acceptable partnerships. Now, I just looking at it, you have to ask yourself. Here's another one. A judge Friday denied a last-ditch effort to dismiss a criminal case against actor Jussie Smollett. You remember him? He's the guy that claimed that he was attacked at 2 a.m. in Chicago. And it says an attorney for the former Empire actor said Smollett's rights were being violated. It said an attorney. Wait a minute. Who was the attorney? You don't know. And I'm going to tell you right now, all the smart people and us not so smart people, if you don't get the names of the people doing things, then how do you know who is responsible? There's a lot of attorneys out there, and the law college in Clark County and throughout the country are turning out lawyers so fast, they'll be the majority in the population one of these days. So if you don't know who to pin the tail on the donkey, then you're responsible for being ignorant. But if you're the smart person, you must know who the guy's lawyer is. It wasn't mentioned in the article. Here's another one. Immigration group criticizes the United States. What the hell? Since when do people immigrating into our country, coming over the border without going through due process, and somebody in Washington saying this is okay, it says the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. That's who it was. Now, there was one person's name in Florida, Sancha Etienne, who was listed. And they're calling this, you don't know anything about this person. You don't know anything about their background. If you don't know anything, how do you pin the tail on the donkey? Oh, gee, I know I never thought about that. But since a jackass is the Democrat symbol, it's about time we start pinning the tail on the donkey. I wasn't going to bring that up, but since it's just kind of popped out on the floor, there you go. So how do we get somebody to answer us with a specific? And this morning at the breakfast, we got on the subject of Garland, the Attorney General for another state. We won't mention the state because they should be embarrassed. But he was being asked a question, the answer which the questioner wanted to know specifically if he had ever considered a topic. And Garland, every time he was asked that question, would respond with an off-the-cuff comment about how things work. So the questioner asked it again. Again, he responds. Questioner asks the question a little differently. He comes back with another response, which has not answered the question. After several minutes of this, it got kind of frustrating. But evidently, Garland must be one of the smart guys because he didn't bother answering the question. And whenever somebody says executive privilege, there are some times where there might be a reason that the answer should be given in private to Congress. But when a guy, and you know what, these congressmen, they can't fire these people because Garland doesn't work for them. So the question now becomes, how do you get an answer when you ask a question? Go to a county commission meeting. They have a thing called public comment, where you as the citizen can go up to the podium, to the microphone, and you can expel all of the grief or questions that you have to the commissioners. Now, it used to be that a commissioner would attempt to respond to your question or your comment. And when they did, it would use your 3 minutes that you're allotted for public comment, so that maybe you never got to finish your comment because the commissioner was talking or the town board member was talking. So the public got wise to that. And as soon as one of the commissioners or a town board member would start to speak, the person at the podium from the public would say, wait a minute, stop the clock until the commissioner has finished speaking, because he's using my time. That was a fair point. And that was what happened. They had to stop the clock. And you know what? After a while, the commissioners and anybody else could not make a comment until later. And what I found interesting was that when a commissioner then comments on the public's comment about different issues, the public never got a chance to respond or debate that issue with that particular commissioner or multiple commissioners. So how do we get to the point where we know what's what? Let me give you an example. I'm interested in thorium, and I have provided some information to the county manager and to Frank Carboni, the commissioner, on the issue of should we be doing some work trying to get thorium research here in Nye County. I mean, after all, we have a thing called the Science and Technology Center that we spent $3 million of taxpayers' money to buy land up in Lathrop Wells, which is in, well, practical purposes, Amargosa. And it's not Armagosa, it's Amargosa. If you spell it right, you'll speak it right. Okay, so anyway, it's Amargosa. And I thought if I gave this to those two people in government, that at least I might get a response. So about a month later, I ran into Frank in Home Depot, and I asked him did he ever look into this thorium issue. Oh, no, I've been so busy, I forgot. So I reminded him again. I didn't expect that Frank was going to do that because he's too busy building a $4 million doghouse, which is not going to cost $4 million. It'll be a lot more than that. You watch. We'll see what the bottom line is when it's all done. So then that was why I mentioned it to the county manager. And I actually sent him, he said he'd look at it. And so I sent him some links, 2 or 3, to kind of familiarize himself with the subject of thorium and thorium reactors and their benefits. So I followed up with him 2 weeks later, and he informed me that he had forwarded the information to Darrell Lacey. Well, I didn't know Darrell Lacey was still employed by the county. So I asked him, I sent an email. I didn't know what's Darrell Lacey's position with the county. And it turns out Darrell is contracted with the county. And I'm not sure how that works. My opinion of having somebody contracted with the county means the county is giving them money. So if the county is giving Darrell Lacey money under a contract, does that mean he comes under the open meeting law? But isn't it funny? I didn't know that he was going to forward that to Darrell. I don't have any issues with Darrell Lacey, but I sure would like to know how things work around here. And the more we look at it, the more we don't get straightforward answers, the more we have to question what happens. I mean, the county bought for $400,000, I think it was, a golf course. Well, whose finances were rescued by purchasing the golf course? I don't know. Kind of hard to tell these things. So my question to you as the general public is, how do we ask a question of anyone in government or anyone that we want to have an answer to? How do we ask the question so that we get a straightforward answer? And funny, at breakfast this morning, we didn't have anybody who had a solid idea. There was some discussion, but it would be nice if somebody out there knows how to ask a question. So the answer, and you can't say, give me a yes or no answer. That's not the right approach. Because if you ask for a yes or no answer, but the question is phrased so that the answer you give is wrong, then that person can't answer that question. Let me give you an example of what that is. In my first marriage, there would be times when the wife and I would have a discussion, as people normally do. By the way, we were married almost 20 years. And one day she asked me a question, and it dawned on me that no matter how I answered her question, the answer would be wrong. I think it was, do you really love me? Well, if I said yes, then the question would be, well, why do you do what you do? If I said no, then I'm really in trouble. So I realized there is no right answer to that question. So if you don't ask the right question, you can expect not to get the answer you're looking for. Now, when I was talking earlier about Merrick Garland being interviewed in Congress, the question was very simple. Had you ever considered a particular issue? All he had to say was, yes, I have. And then they could have had a discussion about how he did that. But he didn't answer the question. He beat around the bush. He did everything but answer the question. Why do they even have these hearings? In my opinion, I always thought Congress ran the country. But it appears now, if you look at it, Congress is the policy-making body that employees and managers have to follow the rules. So Congress writes a law. Right now, we've got a budget that was trying to be passed. It was like 2,000 pages, but nobody has seen it yet. It hasn't been fully written, but we should pass it. Well, I will say for the stupid people in Washington, why didn't you pass it? I mean, who cares? They're just going to spend 3 to 5 trillion. Wow. I can't even get to trillion anymore because that mind, you try and imagine in your brain how big $1 trillion is. I remember when my father complained in the 50s about $1 million being increased. And now we're at the trillion mark. Not just $1 trillion. We're talking 28 trillion. Do you imagine how much money you have to spend to get to $1 trillion? To me, I can't. I have to take away all those zeros and just call it $28. But it isn't. Now, and when people tell me, well, it's $1 bills to the moon and back 500 times, I don't, listen, that doesn't help. So how do we ask the questions to get a good answer? I don't know. Next week, we're going to attack that question again at breakfast. Anybody that wants to get in on that discussion, you can just show up. Maybe some of you out there have a good idea about how to approach this, because I certainly don't. And God knows I would like to. But I don't know if God knows. That's a whole other subject. But for me, I have to figure it out. I have to understand how to ask a question so I get an honest answer. Now, let's take a look at an issue here. The $4 million doghouse. I call it a doghouse because I'm being a little sarcastic. I know we need to take care of abandoned animals, pets. But I don't know, admittedly, what alternatives were discussed when it came to housing animals. I had asked a question, and I was informed rather glibly that this animal shelter could handle anything from a parakeet to an elephant. I got to let that sink in, because to me, I think that's a problem. Is there an alternate way to do this? Probably. But if we didn't ask the question, what alternatives did you consider? Then you won't have an answer. Should we build a brand new facility? Should we just expand the facility we have? Should we build a Taj Mahal? I heard from one individual that there were too many offices, so they cut back the amount of offices in the building. What does an office mean? It means people have a space to work, but it doesn't take care of the animal. And I don't want to stay on that topic. I'm trying to figure out, how do I ask the question? If I'm sitting at home and I'm watching television with the wife, and she says, what do you want to watch? That means she's going to leave it up to me. So I say, okay, let's watch Ancient Aliens. And she'll say, I don't want to watch that today. But she asked me, what did I want to watch? I should have expected that if I pick something, if she didn't want to watch it, she could leave the room. I don't know. And this is how it goes. And I don't think there's anything in high school, I say high school, maybe even in elementary school, that helps people ask the right questions to get the answers that should be forthcoming, rather than skirting around it. Even at breakfast this morning, the topic came up of $1 billion available for spending in Nevada. Some kind of grant. And one of our participants was talking about an amusement park and some other things. And all we could think about, those who have moved here for the rural lifestyle, was, oh no, if too many people come here, it won't be a rural lifestyle anymore. It'll be the beginnings of another Las Vegas. And you have to remember, at one time, Vegas was a rural lifestyle. In 1950, when I was 10 years old, I didn't live in Vegas, but I know, I read the statistics. There were 30,000 people living there. I don't think they ever thought that there would be over 2 million people living in Las Vegas. When I say in Las Vegas, the surrounding area, just encompassing everything around the city of Las Vegas. Nobody envisioned at the time that Lake Mead would become a ghost town. Well, actually, Lake Mead didn't become a ghost town. The water level has dropped so much that the ghost town that was under Lake Mead is now visible. But maybe that's a question that should have been asked. I really don't have enough information to share on why it got to the point where it is today. It's just like my earlier discussion about Charles Blow and this issue of the married people versus the people who are unmarried or not married. We're in a situation these days, folks, going to a little bit of a different topic because I think I've kind of beat that up. I want to talk about something that happened a long time ago, and it has to do with the IRS and taxation. You know, there was a time when single people living alone paid a higher income tax, than did a married couple. So the government, in its infinite wisdom, and providing an incentive to maintain the family unit for the benefit of the country and of the children they raise, gave a benefit to marriage, to married couples. So the intelligent people, the really smart ones who were single and not married, looked at that and said, wait a minute, this is a bias against single people paying a higher tax than married couples. So guess what? They lobbied and they convinced government that single people should have a better taxing system than married people. Now, this guy, Charles Blow, when he wrote his article, never mentions this. But you have to ask the question, what was it like before he wrote this article? He's telling you what he sees happens now. I'm telling you that there was a time when there was a marriage benefit. Granted, there were marriage non-benefits as well. Some of the things being a positive are that you have two people sharing the same space, having a joint income to live a better lifestyle, whereas a single person had to pay for their rental on their own place or their own house. So it was more expensive to live as a single than a married couple. But what happened when two single people live together and they have a commitment to each other? They're basically operating as a married couple, but have not gone through the government requirement of a certificate. Basically, now that they have a tax benefit, the two of them can take advantage of individual benefits, and combined, they are better off than the jointly held married couple. I'm not advocating either side. I'm just saying that, you know, we had a small business doing credit repair in California as part of our real estate business. And we would do that because at that time, the economy was so bad, we had to help people fix their credit so they could get a loan so they could buy a house. And one of the things that came up that we learned was that a married couple, you would think, have a commitment to life. They've taken a vow of commitment to each other. And in that vow, it never says, I'm going to go out and cheat on you because I can. I'm not going to let you know about it. And you found out, you need to forgive me. Never said that in the vows. It's a commitment to integrity and honesty between the two people. It's a contract. It's a marriage contract. But it turns out that that contract is now being violated. I can remember when Nelson and Happy Rockefeller were getting a divorce. My God, you'd have thought the walls of the church were going to fall in. Because at that time, it was not a good thing. But as time has gone on, divorce has become easier and easier. That commitment to a life between two people didn't seem as important anymore. And I don't want to get into how this comes about, but in Charles Blow's article, he goes in to describe the fact that it's really a question of commitment. The marriage vow was a commitment that each of the two parties had a right to expect that, sure, there might be difficulties, there might be tough times, but the commitment is what mattered. That's what that contract was all about. But you know, it's funny. During the courtship, you have one type of lifestyle. And after the marriage vows, you have another lifestyle. Because now you won, both of you. You got to have the certificate. You got all the benefits of a married couple. And some of the businesses, like insurance and things like that, looked at you differently than they look at single people. Which is okay. But it also meant, under that agreement, through thick and thin, through hard times and good times, that you have to work through them together. But when the divorce rate is approaching 50% of the population, there's something wrong with that picture. So the real question became, and is becoming, I think, in the eyes of single people, the question of commitment. And there was somebody wrote this article several years ago about the differences between men and women before and after they get married. They both loved each other before they got married, and they loved each other afterwards. But afterwards, she saw some flaws in him that she was willing to overlook before they got married. And he saw in her the woman he liked. But after they got married, she started to think to herself, you know, there's just something about him that he needs to change. And so she starts to tell him, or help him change to the person she wants him to be rather than the person he was. And he looks at her and he thinks to himself, I still love her the way she was. I don't want her to change. I liked the person. So therein becomes the difficulty. Now, that doesn't happen in every case, but there is a change that takes place. It's kind of like a division between, I didn't do it, and now I've done it. Now I want what I want before I got what I wanted. So when Charles wrote this article, he essentially was getting into that. And he kind of closes out the article saying this. There are plenty of responsible men who don't need a wedding ring as an anchor. And there are plenty of married mothers who would argue that their families are the lights of their lives. But the point remains, marriage as the prevailing ideal is losing its grip. And the stigma of being unmarried is also losing its grip, as it should. In his opinion, now government policy that rewards the married while punishing the single must loosen up. Well, folks, I don't know what Charles is thinking. I don't know that man from Adam. I don't know his background or his history. I just know what he wrote in this particular article. But the issue is commitment. Married couples need to have that commitment because it's not just, listen, maybe we only go through this life once, as Tony Grant used to say on the radio in California. She doesn't know of anybody who comes back to get a do-over. You got one shot in this life, and you want to make the best of it. Now, in some cases, you might think the grass is greener on the other side. You know, you got married, now you're unhappy, you want a divorce. So the grass looks like it's greener on the other side, the people who are out there, that are the potential. But I always say, the grass is greener on the other side unless you water the grass on your side. And what that means is you have to do things to make things work well. Married or just cohabiting, that's the answer. And I know people that have lived together. I was surprised, lived together 40, 50 years without that contract, but they had an understanding and a promise between them. 50 years, and nobody knew. So if we're going to have a good society, we need to look at how do we deal with honesty, fairness, and integrity throughout our relationships with everyone. And what I see happening right now is we have people in government who think it's their job to hide from us, the public, the answers to the questions we have a right to understand and know. And I'll bet you 10 to 1 that when you hear that there are certain rules that have to be followed, either by elected officials or the public. Let me give you an example. Speeding. You're not supposed to speed, right? If you speed and you get caught, you get a ticket. Maybe not always. Maybe there's a reason you were speeding, like you have to get home before you make a mess in your pants. Maybe you're going to get a ticket anyway. But these are the kinds of things that we have to look at. How do we fix this? I don't know. I can tell you this. I think they're lying to us about the Biden administration. Yeah, I know. I'm changing the subject, but I'm really not. This is about commitment, honesty, and integrity. Since the Biden administration took office, he's one of the smart people. All the people with him are the smart people. He has hired geniuses to work with him, people who have experience and knowledge on buffaloing the public. Oh, you don't think that's the case? Pay attention. So here's an article about energy in the paper. Get ready to pay sharply higher bills for heating this winter, along with seemingly everything else. Did that happen during Trump's administration? I don't think so. He made every effort to keep costs down, to make our economy competitive. I will say, though, that prices started to go up during his administration. And I do think they had to. But the Biden administration has just gone hog wild. And they're passing legislation that is so large, so big, it's not incremental. When you're talking $3 trillion, $4 trillion, $5 trillion, and the debt is already at $28 trillion, doesn't that scare you? They say that the amount of debt every man, woman, and child has to pay back right now is $80,000. We're paying government employees. I know we are because I've looked at it. You can go on Transparent Nevada and see it. We're paying one guy, his name is Zamboni, he's a doctor. We're paying him with benefits $1,300,000 a year. The president doesn't make that kind of money, although he's got a lot of bennies, believe me. He doesn't have to make that kind of money. And Trump didn't take a salary when he was president because he was a wealthy man. When I was in real estate, You take a lot of these training classes to help orient your thinking to be successful. And one of the things they taught me was don't envy the guy who makes a lot of money. He's not necessarily cheating. He's read the rules. But you need to learn from the people who make a lot of money. Why not emulate what they do? Why not get to know them? You know, when you want to hire somebody, you don't hire somebody you've never met. You don't hire somebody that you're not familiar with. You want somebody to work for you? Or if you want to go to work for somebody, you have to like each other. It's awful to have to work for somebody that doesn't like you personally. And it's even worse if you don't like the guy you're working for. So when the smart people took over government, all of a sudden we've got all these tankers anchored outside the harbors. Can't bring in stuff to the country. The prices are going through the roof. Hey, and they said inflation is transient. No, it's not. You wait till next year after the holidays. I'm predicting that I think we're going to see an effort by companies to make up for any lost profitability they had by the end of the year. So there's going to be some really great deals come the holiday. And after that comes January, when usually we see all the price increases and all the changes in policies and what have you. And one of the things we're seeing is you cannot buy certain products anymore that you can repair yourself. I'm looking at somebody's coffee grinder these days, and I know how to fix things. I'm technically capable. I can take them apart. So I took this coffee grinder apart. There's a point where I would not go any further in dismantling it. And the manufacturer does not want you to disassemble his coffee grinder. He wants you to send it back to them, a $50 coffee grinder, send it back to them for repair, and then send it back. By the time you deal with shipping and all the other grief and aggravation and the cost of the repair, you might just as well buy a new one. Send it to the landfill. Matter of fact, we had a little discussion this morning with Lou Baker, and he owns a car dealership here in town. And we were talking about electric cars, and I asked him, how do they change the batteries in these electric cars? It looks to me like you can't drop the battery out the bottom. You can't slide it out the side. It looks to me like you got to take the whole body of the car and lift it off and remove the battery. So we were talking about different ways of doing that as they move forward with the adoption of electric vehicles. And I think he's right. I think eventually the batteries that are in these cars will be modular. And you'll be able to slide them out the side. There'll be a way to do that. It'll still have to be done at a garage, but who knows, what can happen. So I want to remind everybody that's listening or on YouTube, if you want to come to this breakfast, it's early in the morning. Now, we didn't do it early in the morning because we don't want people to show up. We did it early in the morning, and this is since 2007. It's been this early. But it's so that at 9 o'clock we break. That's done. If we haven't finished, it's too bad. The meeting's over. We have the rest of the day to do all the things we would normally do. So people who sleep in, who tell me they sleep in, and then I see them at breakfast at Terrible's at 7 in the morning. And they're there. I've seen them. Who tell me that our meeting is too early for them, but they can go to breakfast at 7 in the morning at Terrible's. Those are people that I have less confidence in believing anything else they tell me. There's a lot of discussion these days at breakfast about various topics, and redistricting is one of them. That was a topic that came up this morning. And I'm told this morning, I haven't had a chance to verify it, that the population in Nye County, based on the census, was 51,000 and some odd. It seems to me, in remembering some things I've read in the law, again, I don't give legal advice, I'm not a lawyer, but I can talk about law because I'm a citizen. I got to live under it. That it's either 45,000 population or 50,000, that there are some rules that change that affect how Nye County does business as a government. I'm going to look it up, and maybe on next week's show, I'll be able to talk a little more intelligently about that. But until then, we're going to have to live with what we see, the questions we ask, the thoughts we have. And quite frankly, there are times when this host gets a little discouraged by the fact that you can't believe everything or anything anymore, because everything has become propaganda. There are a few rated TV shows these days that we watch that we believe give us just news. One American News was one of those. I like that. I like Newsmax because they're the opposite of CNN. And there are one or two shows on the Fox network that we watch, that I like to watch, because basically they're news. They have a slant on the news, but they're news. They have people who come on who tell us what's going on based on their perspective. That's a good thing. But you know, not everybody gets treated equally. Not everybody has the same thoughts and ideas, but we need to start to share. And with that, I want to finish with one last thing. Some time back, a man named Cliff was the chairman for the Democrat Party in Nye County. And at that time, I was with the Republican Party doing the breakfast. Not as a Republican, but just doing the breakfast. And I had invited Cliff to come to breakfast and join us and have a discussion about, maybe we don't see eye to eye on everything, but can't we sit down and figure out what we could work together on that we do agree we could do to make life better in Nye County? Things we don't like, fix those. Things we would like to see, advocate for those. And Cliff was into it. He actually brought two other people with him, one of them being Jim Farrell. And Jim has written some really nasty stuff in the newspaper, but it's my sadness that after Cliff died, so did any communication with the Democrats. So with that, if there's a Democrat out there that wants to come to the breakfast, we'd love to have you. We'll treat you with integrity and respect, and that's what it's all about. With that, this is Andy Alberti, 98.1 FM, and that's great to be back. And I am now out of here.